I'm a long-time Android user trying out an iPhone for the first time ever. So we know that the iPhone 12 Pro Max has great cameras for shooting video. But what's the experience like for someone who is a Samsung fan?
Dolby Vision and 10-bit log via Filmic Pro, those two video features have been the main talking points since Apple released their new top-of-the-range device. This is the first time in my life I have ever owned an iPhone. I've been a happy Samsung user, shooting video with S8, S9 and then a Note 20 Ultra. In that time, I've never really felt I was missing anything, but then came Dolby Vision. So I'm really curious to see what can be done with this new technology, new to iPhone at least. The iPhone Pro has 3 rear cameras, ultra-wide, wide and telephoto. All 3 cameras use 12 megapixel sensors. The main difference between the Pro Max and other iPhones is the size of the device's main camera sensor, which is 47% bigger. A bigger sensor means it's better in low-light conditions, as well as producing a shallower depth of field. When it comes to aperture, the wide and the ultra are the same in both the 12 Pro and the 12 Pro Max. When it comes to the telephoto, the 12 Pro actually has a slightly wider aperture, but less magnification, 2 times instead of the Max's 2.5 times. The 12 Pro Max's main camera aperture of f1.6 is bigger than on the iPhone 11 Pro Max, which was f1.8, so that should allow a shallower depth of field. Just tap on one of the 3 icons, ultra-wide, wide and tele, and the lens switches with a snap. This can also be done while you are recording if need be. It's pretty glitch-free, although while first testing I switched to the tele lens and it wouldn't focus immediately. Eventually it did lock on though. The main wide lens is the best quality, as you would expect, considering it has the best sensor. What you will find with tele lenses in smartphones is that they don't give you a shallower depth of field as you might hope. All they really do is get you closer and narrow the field of view. In these times of fast-moving tech, there's almost something old-fashioned and reassuring about the never-changing iPhone camera user interface. It's nice and clear and simple, although there's a few things which immediately seem a little bit quirky, the way the camera settings are set up as default, for example. In the native app, you can't shoot 24 frames per second at 1080p. You can only shoot 24 frames per second at 4K resolution. Tap here to set the resolution in frames per second and then grab a shot. But when you open the camera again, it reverts back to the default 30 frames per second and 1080p. In the settings, you can stop it doing this. You can also change the default resolution and frame rate. So the camera will now open with these settings as default. It seems the iPhone now also records in HEVC by default, the H.265 codec. Only trouble is, this codec is not always supported. Again, you can go in and change this in the settings, but certain features like 60 frames per second and HDR only work in HEVC. You can't navigate to camera settings directly from the camera app like you can with Samsung phones. You have to switch out of the camera app, go to settings, go to camera, then find video settings. So that's like 3 steps to get to video settings. I mean, it would obviously be much more convenient to have video settings accessible directly when you're in video mode. This device comes with a new sensor shift optical image stabilization. This means the sensor moves to remove handshake instead of the lens. And Apple says this can make adjustments at up to 5,000 times per second, which is pretty impressive. As far as I can see, there's no way to switch off this stabilization. Although using Filmic Pro you can. There's also no option to make the stabilization more or less aggressive. Personally, I prefer to have the option to switch off certain settings. Whether you want your footage to be stabilized is really a creative choice. And when you can't set this yourself, it means the device is making that creative decision for you. Bear in mind, it's only the main camera which uses the sensor shift. The other cameras use dual optical image stabilization. These systems can adjust at about 1,000 times per second, which is, obviously a fifth of the sensor shift version of the main camera. Dolby Vision is an HDR feature, which comes new to the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Dolby Vision is a system which adds extra dynamic range to our photos, videos, TV sets, and now iPhones. Of course, most of us know about Dolby Sound and surround sound, and indeed Dolby Vision comes from the same company, Dolby Laboratories. Now, Dolby Vision HDR is not that straightforward. These days, many smartphones carry some kind of HDR. Added to that, there's different levels, some of which you can't switch off. Essentially, Dolby Vision is like other HDR systems, adjusts different parts of the image to create a greater dynamic range. That means it analyzes each frame and maybe boosts the shadowy parts and pulls down the overblown highlights. These adjustments are then stored as metadata, which goes along with the video. If your monitor and software can read it, it applies the metadata. If not, or you don't have it set right, it won't, or it will display the video incorrectly. Dolby Vision is enabled by default, but it's pretty simple to switch it off. Open up Settings, then Camera, then Record Video, and scroll down until you find the switch. Why would we want to turn it off? Well, as I say, not all devices can play Dolby Vision. If you shoot something in HDR and view it on the iPhone, you'll see it has this extra zing to it. Simply put, the brighter parts of the image are brighter. As well, HDR tone mapping adjusts different areas of the image, which might not be the look you want, although I believe it is not possible to switch off this tone mapping in iPhones, even if you toggle off HDR. For example, in this shot I took of the clouds here, I pan down and you can see different areas of the sky, sort of pulsating as the camera moves. The thing is, these HDR features in smartphones are there to really get the maximum out of a tiny sensor and a tiny lens. They help to push the image so that they now sit closer to low-budget DSLRs in terms of quality. The downside is tonal fluctuations in parts of the image. iPhones have limited native manual control. Yes, you can change frame rate and resolution, but you have almost no control over focus, ISO, shutter speed, and white balance. So if you want to shoot with manual control, you will need a third-party app. Of course, we've all heard of Filmmaking Pro, but there are others such as Mavis, Moment, Beastcam, ProCam, ProTake, and many more. As you probably know, I'm a Filmmaking Pro user, but I'm used to using it on a Samsung. It feels a little bit smoother on iOS. Doing a focus pull feels a little bit nicer. There's a few things missing though. No option to switch off sharpness and noise reduction. On the plus side, there's 10-bit color, 10-bit log, and Dolby Vision. And one major reason why I finally decided to try the iPhone 12 Pro Max was the ability to shoot Dolby Vision with manual control. Filmmaking Pro works really well with the iPhone 12 Pro Max. You can switch between 8-bit, 10-bit, and Dolby Vision. You also have access to all the lenses. Not all lenses give you full manual control though. The ultra-wide has a locked focus, but that's down to the device, not the app. However, the tone mapping on the iPhone means sometimes you can lock exposure and it will still change during the shot when you move the camera between light and dark areas, for example. Maybe a small thing, but it's nice to have this option. 25 frames per second is considered to be a PAL TV setting. PAL TV is used in Europe, Africa, Asia, and South America. In camera settings for video, you can switch this on, and then you will have the option to shoot in 25 frames per second using the native app. This leaves us in a bit of a strange situation. We can have 25 frames per second at 1080p, but not 24 frames per second. So that's a bit odd. It's just a small thing, but if you shoot a lot of video, it's nice to have a quick 24 frames per second option. Then again, my Samsung Note 20 Ultra only allows 24 frames per second in the native app using 8K. As has been spotted by others, the new iPhones sometimes produce quite an exaggerated flare. If there's a light or lights or the sun is at the wrong angle, you get one or more bright dots moving around the screen. I also get this with my Samsung phones, but it's not so pronounced. Lens flares can be cool, of course, but when it's a tiny dot, it looks more like someone's aiming a laser sight at you. Whatever device you use, there's always going to be some kind of flaw. No camera is perfect, but this is quite an important problem, I think. We can try to avoid shooting at certain angles, but night shots in a city where there are lights everywhere, that can, as you imagine, be almost impossible. Summing up, I think the iPhone 12 Pro Max has great cameras for shooting video, as you would expect from Apple's top-of-the-range device. But there are some caveats. I didn't experience much noise when using the main camera. However, switching to the ultra-wide or tele lenses, you suddenly find a lot of extra noise. Using Filmmaking Pro and the main camera, I was able to use very high ISO settings without getting overwhelming noise, but not with the secondary lenses. That said, my Samsung Note 20 Ultra performs pretty similarly actually. So this is down to the weaker secondary sensors. In fact, this is a reason why we might not abandon those conversion lenses just yet, especially in low light. Using a conversion tele or ultra-wide over the main camera might actually provide better quality than the inbuilt options. So my main 2 down thumbs for this phone are the exaggerated lens flares and the aggressive tone mapping that can't be disabled. My thumbs up are the access to 10-bit color via Filmmaking Pro and other apps. There's Dolby Vision, good low-light performance of the main sensor, and sensor shift stabilization. And one thing I haven't mentioned is the long-lasting battery, which I believe is down to Apple's A14 Bionic chip, which is said to be very power efficient as well as super fast. I think that the autofocus works pretty well. At first, when I was first trying it, it didn't snap into place as fast as when I use my Note 20 Ultra. But it's pretty good. It does it quite smoothly. So I think it's good. I'm not sure if it's quite as good as the Note 20 Ultra, I have to say, but not much in it.
So that's it for this video. I hope you found it enjoyable. A little insight into the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Also, I'm using the selfie camera right now, so that gives you a sense of how good that is. And also the inbuilt mics. So that's, you can get a sense of the quality of those too. And anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.